One, two, three, four.
My main draw to music was its, how do I say this? I guess there's just no way to say it but to say it. It spoke to me on a religious level, and there was something about the abstract nature of what music communicated, or what it was able to say to me on a personal level, that was able to capture the ineffable, like that thing that you can't say in words anyway, right? It became a part of my spiritual practice, and I think that I think that's true for maybe a lot of people, and it's something that we don't really talk about much, but my musical practice and my spiritual practice are intertwined. A lot of the music that I'm interested in, both as a publisher and as a composer and performer in general, is music that brings together the sort of disparate worlds of new music and new choral music, right? There's something like 250,000 choirs in America. It's like 10% of the U.S. population. It's over 50 million Americans sing in a choir on a weekly basis.
Wow.
Yeah. And a lot of those are like religious organizations, but there's some school groups, but I think even just not counting the school groups, it's still over 40 million people. So it's this huge group. And just by contrast, there are 2,000 community and professional orchestras. For me, like I grew up in the new music world, right? Like I did my master's and my doctorate at CalArts, which is an institution that's known for really avant-garde and experimental kind of forward-thinking music. But then as a singer, I was making a lot of my living as a chorister, right? Like I was working in churches and being a ringer for semi-professional groups and things like that. And I just noticed how disparate these worlds were. And I started finding groups that had people like me in them, who were performers and composers, and were really interested in bringing those two worlds together. We've started this like network of new music ensembles that are really emphasizes this notion of bringing what's going on in new music to choral music.
Mm-hmm.
And I think all these separations between art and entertainment and concert music and popular music, I think they're all very silly and arbitrary. I think by advocating for this particular kind of contemporary work, we can start to bridge that gap and show people what new music can look like, and I think there's a really big opportunity there. When people ask me what I do, right, is I often tell them that I'm an advocate for new and innovative music for the voice, right? And how I do that is as a composer and as a performer and as a conductor and as a publisher. I think you have to attack that mission from all these different angles and facets, and so what you're talking about, like, that's an important part of my work is laying like planting the seeds for future curators. I just had two pieces done by Northeastern Oklahoma State University, an excellent choir. And their programming, their director, Jeff Wall, was doing some of the most innovative choral music programming I've seen. And it just breaks my heart that people don't know what he's up to. Like, he commissioned a new piece for me. Cool. I was very grateful for it. But it was the other stuff on his program that I didn't write that I was like, I've never heard of these amazing composers from all over the world that you have found and that your students are gangbusters for. It was virtuosic and deeply relevant. Like, the style of music was just so a part of the new music conversation. Some of the most interesting stuff is happening in collegiate ensembles. There's a really beautiful book called "What Is Art For?" by an anthropologist in, I think, Seattle area. She talks about this idea of like how art is really difficult to define. But the one of the things that makes a thing art is that it has been made special. We have put a frame around it, right? And in the way, and it has a parallel to how we have made things sacred. We've decided this is a sacred thing and this is not. This is art and this is mundane, right? And so, and I believe like that really spoke to me, this understanding of the sacred and specialness, and how through an artistic practice, especially like through contemporary music, right? Like a lot of philosophy around contemporary music, starting with John Cage, is about and art in general is about expanding our understanding of what has a frame around it and what can be considered art, right? And sometimes that's led to, you know, what people think is a joke, right? It's led to Duchamp's urinal, right, and things like that, or John Cage's, you know, 433 or whatever. But having experienced those works of art, like talking about 433 is a ridiculous exercise, but hearing it performed is an exceptional experience. At some point, someone starts giggling, and somebody in the audience always goes, shh. You know, and like, like what am I supposed to do with that? You know, like it's just so amazing. You know, it's just such like an astounding part of the experience. At first, like, you know, you're wondering what's going on, or you're just thinking like, gosh, don't you just want to stand up and yell, the emperor is not wearing any clothes? You know, but by the third movement, it settles in and you're like, what if I turn off what I've been listening to, which is my internal dialogue or my internal monologue about the piece? And what if I actually listen to what's happening? And everything changes. That's one layer of letting go of your ego and just listening to what's actually going on in the world around you and bringing it in and being a part of it, letting it be a part of you. And that is a really beautiful, centering, and joyful experience. If you look at the kinds of singing styles and the singing sounds from all over the world, it's very apparent that that there is not one way to use the voice, right? I mean, we have bush languages where clicks are valid consonants and syllables. And we've got pansori in South Korea, which is, you know, a kind of very earthy, guttural, noise-filled kind of singing style that to get the right sound, pansori singers develop vocal nodules, which is considered damage in the West, right? But is a necessary part of creating the true pansori sound. So with that in mind, when I see tenor voice, yeah, it's frustrating and very Eurocentric, right? To know that there is some idealized way of singing that I'm supposed to encapsulate. And I started to realize that, like, if I let go of some of that, and if I allowed myself to go back to childhood play of sound, to just explore my own voice. How do I notate? Right? Like, how do I notate that? And why do I care if it's notated? I can still perform it, you know? And so embracing this part of my practice, getting into the physicality of the sound, has allowed the experience to be everything that I want a spiritual practice to be, both external and expressive, but also internal, right? And introspective, and paying attention to the physical sensations and experience of making these sounds. And we can take this study, this introspective nature and this spiritual journey that we capture in these small ensemble moments or these solo moments that I'm finding in live electronics, and we can bring them to the choir. We can bring them to the orchestra. You know, it takes examining our values as classical musicians and realizing that that they aren't universal values, that music is not a universal language that only, you know, white men from 150 years ago in Europe understood. Like, you know, anyone who thinks that music is a universal language and then is like, all they need to do is listen to Beijing opera and they'll realize that it doesn't speak to them at all. So it's a ridiculous notion. It's vitally culturally informed. And that doesn't take away its potency to speak to us, right? And there are all these different ways that it can, if we are willing to let go of our values around what is right and what is good music.